All right. So now we finished talking about theories, and now we want to start talking about evidence of discrimination. And in this first section this week, we're going to talk about direct evidence of discrimination. So let's give it a little bit of outline. So we have our sources of earning gap. So we know it depends on human capital, like education and experience. It could also depend on things that are about taste for job conditions and also choice of occupation and major. And we'll talk a little bit more about those but next week. But those obviously can also be influenced by discrimination in the society. And then we're also looking at discrimination as a source of the earnings gap. And we think it exists, but it's a little bit hard to measure. And so this week we're going to look at some ways that it has been measured in some fairly convincing ways. So this we're talking about direct evidence of discrimination. So one example of those could be legal cases, which I'll leave you for the textbook talks about a few in there. And we also can look at advertisements, which this video is going to be about, and we can look at experimental evidence as well. So that's what we're going to talk about this week. Next week, we'll look at quantitative methods to look at this. Okay, so this is from newspapers in the U.S. in 1960. Okay, and so before the Civil Rights Act and before these kind of direct, open discrimination was made illegal, it was very easy to find evidence of discrimination in the U.S. Okay, so you could just look at any newspaper in the help wanted section, and there would be all kinds of strong discriminatory language expressed in ads. So if you take a look at these, some of for example, lab tech, experience, modern Southside Medical Center, white, salary open. Okay, so the next one, waitress, white, good tips. These were in Chicago Tribune in 1930. So we see the employers had a strong preference for race. The next one after that is they put white in capital letters before even listing what the job is, and they also later on you see that there's a preference for age. Okay, and then I'm not going to read all of these to you because you can pause the video and just read them if you want. And I'll put an image in the this week's lesson. But again, we see all kinds of different ones. Some of them are about gender. For example, some are about marital status. Well, just to list one more, companion, white, light housework for a single lady. So this person must be a woman and must be single. And then we find a few others. Is there any that prefer? There are a few that prefer somebody who is black, and I believe there's one that prefers somebody who is Asian. So, anyways, this is not a representative sample, but it's still it was. This is actually from some research that was done, and it was very easy to find discriminatory preference about gender, race, age, marital status, etc. After the 1960s, this stuff was outlawed. So although discrimination did not disappear, this kind of open discrimination became illegal. Okay, so let's look at this real quick. So before the passage of the Civil Rights Act, this kind of discrimination was widespread and open. Okay, no one was even bothering to try to hide it. And so they would openly advertise in preferences for race and gender in job advertisements. And there was just systematically, minorities were systematically denied opportunity in all aspects of life. So it was limits on education, job prospects, where they could live, political rights, who they could marry, etc. Okay, so in every area of life, that was true. With the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, this kind of direct, open discrimination became illegal. So discrimination was not did not disappear overnight, but in terms of the openly discriminatory newspaper ads, they did disappear very quickly. And the part of the reason is because this was just too easy. It was too easy to prove. So discrimination would continue, but it became much, much harder to prove. And so later on, researchers had to be a little bit more innovative in order to find it, right? So again, discrimination has not disappeared, but we do think it has decreased significantly because of these laws, but it also has become a little bit harder to find. Now, one of the things is the fact that the Civil Rights Act got helped to decrease discrimination to such an extent is a little bit of a criticism of econ theory, because econ theory kind of predicted that competition would help to get rid of discrimination, but it seems like a legal change was needed in order for that to actually happen. Okay, let's look at something else you might find a little bit interesting before we move on to start looking at the other methods. So yeah, advertisements can clearly show you the strong discrimination in the U.S. history. So this kind of research with job ads nowadays, you're not going to find much in the U.S. Or probably zero, almost zero, because companies have legal experts in their hiring that will actually direct them about what they can and cannot put into their job ads. Okay, so that one has been eliminated. It doesn't mean discrimination is eliminated. Again, I want to reiterate that. It just means that this open has been eliminated, this open discrimination of this type. Um, but other countries, not all other countries, but some other countries do not have strongly enforced laws against discriminatory hiring. So I know of research in China and in Mexico. I'm sure it's been done in other countries, but these are the two countries I know about the research. Has found that many job ads are directed at only men or only women. So the job specifically says this job is for men, this job is for women, and they contain other discriminatory requirements besides gender. Okay. So in both cases, it seems that women are much more likely to have extra requirements such as age. Usually it's an age limit for certain jobs. Looks, so there's often things about height, weight, beauty, etc., and marital status. So many jobs requesting for women to be single. And they're also much, at least in the China case, more likely to be pushed towards jobs in things like sales or administration assistant. Okay. Then for men, there's also jobs directed only at men. The extra requirements on average, not always, often indicate a higher status. So often the person needed to be a minimum age. And there's also discriminatory requirements that you could think are about appearance. For example, discriminatory status about minimum height. Also ones about, in China, there was things about the province of origin for blue collar jobs, etc. And they're more likely to be requested for managerial and technical jobs. Okay, so there seemed to be clear gender discrimination going on in these jobs, with much more focus on appearance and age for women. And these were evidence too of would lead to occupational segregation of some sort because of being channeled into certain types of jobs and certain levels of jobs. Just to give you a very specific example from this, it's kind of messy, but this is taken from a photo that was posted on a factory fence in China. So this sign was on a fence at a factory in China. I can read about 3/4 of it, but the bottom is super messy and kind of blurry. But I had a student help me translate the bottom part. So the sign says, "Male workers, newbies and old hands have an equal opportunity. Bring real identification. Those from Sichuan, Henan, Anhui, and Jiangxi will not be hired." So those last four are four provinces of China. That people from those provinces will not be hired. So in this case, in this particular ad, we can see just clear evidence. One is gender. They're advertising for men only, and the second one is they're excluding people from certain parts of China. And I don't really want to get into why they would want to exclude people from those specific parts, but it seems at least some people I've asked said there was sort of negative stereotypes associated with people with those provinces of China, for example. So, anyways, this is a clear idea of both gender discrimination and discrimination by place of origin as well. Now, I just gave you this example because you might think it's interesting. One thing to note. So China has instituted a new law, and I believe it went into effect in the beginning of 2019 to limit gender discrimination in hiring. So it's trying to limit things like people asking about marital status and pregnancy and those kind of things. It remains to be seen how effective it will be. But there is a new law, and it's possible that this new law is going to bite harder, and at least this kind of direct open discrimination will be reduced by this new law. So I don't really want to say too much about the future because it's possible this new law will have a big effect.